Hello, my name is Joshua, and thank you for viewing this video. In this video, I would like to talk about creativity, and it's going to be more of my philosophy on creativity. I've tried to talk about creativity in different vantages or in different presentations, and based on comments and conversations I've had with people very recently and discussion groups I've been a part of on Clubhouse, an app that was suggested to me by a friend. Um, I feel like there's some things I could say about creativity that maybe aren't things that people normally say or aren't things that people really use or know because most people are not creative professionals and um, you can be a part of a culture that's very ambivalent about creativity, and so that's pretty much the impetus for this. And so much of it is going to come from my own experience. Much of it is just going to be a synthesis, but I will probably reference various facts and citations of various things I read in papers in the past, but I don't really, because I don't have access to the database, and I don't really. I just found a ladybug. Sorry. Come here. So I just found a ladybug, and it's like, oh, no, 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 no. Come here, come here, you. There we are. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So I'll start with saying that uh, when one is trying to be creative, what they're ultimately trying to do is generate ideas. And much of the creative process comes down to ideation. It's not really to say that being creative is all about ideation, that that's all that um, is relevant, but it is to say that what most of the legwork that any person is doing in their practice or collaborating with others or doing research or studying, whatever. It's idea generation, and idea generation is a um, well, there's science on it, and then there's just what actually occurs for the individual within practice. And so I would say that your practice has to be in terms of the systems and the habits you have daily. Your practices and your systems have to be measured based on how, or evaluated in terms of how many and how great a quality of ideas you feel that these things give if you're trying to be a creative professional. I wouldn't say that you reduce your life down to my participating in X or what leads me to have ideas that I value, but I would say that for maybe depending on how professionally you want to be a creative professional, and that's in the sense that if you want to be what people are calling a creative entrepreneur, if you want to have a job in a creative domain, and if you want to be a traditional creative professional, and I don't know really where to make the distinction between creative entrepreneur and a creative traditional creative professional, because I think the traditional creative professional can fit into either of these. But I don't think that if you're necessarily a creative entrepreneur and you necessarily have a creative you're working in a creative industry, that you're necessarily a traditional creative professional. And the reason why I make the distinction between these three things being a traditional creative professional is because what I consider a traditional creative professional is somebody like Michelangelo or somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, though these are cliche, normal, old, classical, artistic, creative geniuses. That's why I've used them because everybody's heard of them, hopefully, and knows them. So, but I don't mean just their level of overall achievement and talent. The reason why I choose these individuals is to reference something that's actually true about their time period and the way that artists were trained and the way that um, art was viewed by society to make a distinction between, maybe the more classical creative professional view versus the more modern creative entrepreneur and creative industry worker. Let's just call it creative industry worker and creative entrepreneur. So the reason why I want to make this distinction is because of the attitudes and the methods of training. So in classical creative professional has an education that could be described as mimesis or a type of education that takes place within a space like an atelier. An atelier is a school that features a certain methodology or style that is presented by a master and their apprentices or other masters that hail from their teaching or their lineage. And uh, because this is the way that artists learn classically, more often than not, what you're going to find is that they tended to produce people who were the best at practicing it, being a practitioner. The practitioner sorry, the practitioner reality, the act of doing these things, the act of painting, the act of sculpting, the practice of such. And so this is the first difference. And it's not to say that contemporary art schools and contemporary creative entrepreneurs or contemporary art schools and however else creative people educate themselves to be creative entrepreneurs. Not to say that these methods are not predicated on practice, but it's because they have different criteria in mind in terms of what's relevant or important in their educational paradigms that you may be exceptional at practicing these things by going to these schools. You may not. And it's not the schools or their particular goal to make you as exceptional at practicing these things as you possibly can or could be. It's your own drive and or your own familial or educational background that precedes your entering into these art schools and academies. Usually, that's more of the differentiating factor. It's the way art schools work these days is that people do not teach you how to play, people do not teach you how to do the thing. What you have to do is have a high level of proficiency at being able to perform at these various activities and then have tryouts or submit a portfolio or do something to show that you already have a certain amount of expertise or one could say mastery over your particular craft or the subject matter at hand. And through a certain level of scrutiny or analysis by a panel of expertise, they are going to select from the candidacy who they will admit into their school so their talents will be shaped and molded by the expertise within that institution at their disposal. And so that has a certain consequence, because what if you go to an art school and you're accepted because you have the, let's say, natural talents and aptitude, but there is no professor or no teacher who really has a style that is actually in alignment with your particular like methodological lineage. Um, and that's the thing that people don't talk about in being creative. It's the fact that to actually learn to do the thing in the first place requires methodological understanding or training. The ability to successfully practice or do something. Skills are relevant. They're highly, highly, highly relevant. And when you're looking at an artist, this is why people try to make the statement that creativity is basically predicated on expertise, or expertise is the only relevant thing to consider when you're looking at creativity, and the science just doesn't say that. But the reason why this narrative seems plausible, I'm not going to talk about its palatability, but its plausibility is because, in all honesty, when you're looking at a creative professional or looking at a highly creative individual, you're looking at an individual who has a certain level of proficiency in a certain number of skills and a certain array of these skills. And that is the methodological space. And the methodological space is the one that actually is pretty much your seat of um, intuition and knowing, because it's how you participate within the space of writing, or within the space of creating music and whatever you do, or you exist in the space of painting or sculpting. It's your participation within that space with which you can invoke or seek to display creativity. and and I think that it's why certain personality types are more drawn to certain creative activities than others. But um, technique, skill, methodology, it's very salient in terms of being creative, because one of the things that one can do, for instance, because this is true, and this is something that you see many creative or eminent individuals do across history, is that they apprentice themselves at many different schools or ateliers, learning many different methodologies and approaches to doing something. And because they learn these very many different methodologies and approaches at doing things, they have a wider range of decisions that they can make whenever they're participating in their creative endeavor. And so the first thing you probably want to make sure that is true about yourself, if you are looking to be more, oh well, shoot, I started with creative professionals. See, I start giving a rationale for why I'm talking about what I'm talking about, and then I move away from the subject matter itself. So look, okay, so that's the rationale for why I'm talking about this in the first place, and how it relates to creativity, and why creative professionals, um, they have a certain level of expertise. And it's because of the process of, and I already started to go on to why this is relevant to the discussion of ideation. But it's because whenever one is looking at creative professionals in the past, because a lot of this I've learned from studying eminent individuals and my own like activity and practice, and talking and being around other creative professionals and asking them questions and looking at what they do and how they practice and all other sorts of things. And so that's where a lot of this is coming from. And so when you're talking about were you talking about creative entrepreneurs or God, I hate noise. Creative entrepreneurs or creative intuition and like silence. Um, Sorry. Okay. So when you're talking about, sorry about that. When you're talking about creative entrepreneurs and you're talking about creative industry workers, um, there's variability in terms of their technical competency. There is a particular like cutoff, but here's the reason why I stick with the category of creative professional. So one thing that, especially in music, that one can notice is the predominance of or the rise and the proliferation of technology programs. So most modern music, most like at least everything that's popular on the top 100 billboards, is made on a laptop. And it's not to say that there's something wrong with the use of technology. I'm not saying that at all. You're getting more kinds of music, and you're getting a different sound and types of genres that are emerging because music is being done this way, like progressive metal and whatnot. So it's not all bad. I'm not saying that. I don't have that take. But one of the things that one will notice is that there's a disparity or inequality in skills. Now, it's not the case that technology has gotten to the point where it can completely make skill and expertise irrelevant, or the disparities in them. And I think too that from a philosophical standpoint, I think that creativity is best. Well, so from a philosophical standpoint, I would say this. So it's because whenever you learn something, it becomes a part of your psychology. I'll just put it like that. If you develop a high amount of expertise and proficiency at performing certain activities, they begin to color the way that you think about things, you see the world, approach and do things, because certain ways of using your brain or thinking are more relevant to these activities than not. And because this is true of any activity, whether or not you're talking about mathematics or philosophy or literature or poetry or whatever, it leaves a mark on you. It's a very indelible mark. It leaves a mark on your psychology. It leaves a mark on your emotions. Well, psychology is emotions. What I mean to say is that it influences the expression of your temperament, and it influences the way that you see the world and what your overall take on metaphysics is. Your metaphysical reality is going to be colored and nuanced and influenced by expertise and mastery at particular topics or subject matters. And so, because this is the reality from my experience at the very least, and what I tend to notice about other people, because it's not like I can do the experiment or whatever, but I tend to notice for very creative people that their ideas are highly subjective. So because creative ideas are highly subjective in the first place, I tend to have this um, notion that the creative idea arises from the intermingling and mixing of the expertise and the history and life and temperament of that person. So when you're looking at an idea, there's something to appreciate about it from the standpoint of its accuracy or its scope, but then there is something else to appreciate about it in terms of its representation, the particular vantage point it is bringing to light or to bear, the manner in which it may be applied, and the aesthetic to the idea itself. And that may sound funny, but the ideas have their own aesthetic because ideas come from people, and people are steeped in cultures, and people have varying different levels of expertise, and people have varying and differing levels of temperamental variances. And they're embedded and localized to a particular time period, society, and space. And all of this confluences or confounds within the idea. And because ideas are like this, I tend to think that if you really want it to be the case that you have the most creative ideas you can, you want the information to live within you, to be within you. You don't want it to be maybe. So I would say, like, for instance, even within creative industries, I would want it to be no other way than whatever it is I do on the computer can't be attributed to the computer. It can't be attributed to my colleagues or the um, job itself or the industry. It's not dependent. None of my creativity is dependent on the state of affairs around myself, whether there is the technology or whether there is this particular job or whether there is whatever. I can still create reliably these things. Perhaps they will take different forms. Perhaps the manner in which and the scale at which I'm able to produce creative ideas, and perhaps the overall amount of remuneration and money and all of these sorts of things that can be um, attributed to my creative ideas is very much so dependent on technology and all of these sorts of things because, well, anyways, that's another discussion. But I don't think like for the I don't think for the when I look at history, and nobody's done, for instance, in cognitive science or neuroscience or the study or creativity as a study from the vantage of personality. Nobody's done the study where we look to see how much technology is influencing the way creativity is showing up in the world. Or so, for instance, this question, or at least this observation, cannot be addressed by the data currently available because of the particular framing of the data, in the sense that everything that's been done so far that I've read in cognitive science and neuroscience and personality theory on creativity and the phenomenon of creativity, and everything I've seen as a person from looking at musicians and writers mostly, and scientists and other academics. Um, Everything I've seen seems to indicate that creativity, when it's most uh, profound, I guess. I don't know if that's the word I want to use, because I don't want a historical connotation. I just want a particular, like the overall magnitude of the effect of the creative idea. That seems to be the most optimum magnitude one can reach is only attainable if they have a certain level of mastery and expertise at something. Um, and multiple things usually. And so it's why I make a distinction between a classic creative professional and a creative industry worker and a creative entrepreneur. I think that people should try to make themselves classical creative professionals. And to be a classical creative professional, you do need expertise and a certain level of mastery at whatever it is that you're doing. And from what I've seen in terms of professionals, that seems to be the story for most people across the board. What you do find is that people have different skill sets, different levels of training or whatever, but even if they're not exactly the uh, most talented person in that building, they are by far and in large much more capable at whatever it is that they do know than any person you're going to find in the average population. And I think that that's because all commercial spaces are competitive, and so I think that that's why that's that way. I don't really know. Um, you find that less so true in schools. So you may find in schools that people get in because they know someone or whatever. But that's also why not everybody finds a job when they leave school, because you actually need skill and a certain level of mastery. Um, Talent helps, but talent isn't what people really care about. People ultimately care about uh, reliable reproductive performance. And so they just want to see that they can actually reliably gain from employing your services or buying your products a certain quality of outcome. And that's all people care about, whether or not you're talking about comedy or movies or whatever. Because one of the things that we've seen, I guess, I suppose, in this capitalistic climate of ours, is that the people have a very large breadth of consumptive preferences. So the range for what is palatable to the human imagination and whatever emotions are behind and responsible for our obsession with entertainment, these things seem to be amenable to many different kinds of representations in terms of productions and ideas. There's a lot of different movies, a lot of different genres. There's a lot of different um, genres of music, literature, dance, whatever, man. There's a lot. Um, for many different reasons. I think most of them ultimately are competitive and commercial. So I don't know entirely, but not really. I don't know, man. But it's just there's a lot. Okay, there's a lot of variation in the world in terms of um, what people create and what people consume. And so, uh, what this means ultimately to me is that the only thing you can pay attention to is the quality of the outcome. You cannot really you cannot really pay attention to anything beyond that because when you're selling something or when you're trying to get somebody to maybe display your art or show something to someone or allow you to speak or whatever, there are many different things that a creative person may try and undertake in their lifetime, but nonetheless, if you go down this route, if you truly want to, like, then the only thing you have is the quality of the work you can produce. And you basically have to rely upon that in terms of what you understand from your expertise and overall mastery at whatever it is you're doing, because people are not going to tell you whether you are good at doing what you're doing or not. Not really. So, what people are going to tell you is whether or not they like what you're doing, are they find it useful. That's all people can evaluate. And because you're trying to be creative, the once I guess like man, I feel like I've been meandering all over the place in this talk, but um once so once you're okay, so at once you have this skill set and you have mastery and you're trying to be creative as a creative professional, then you pick a path. You decide to be a creative entrepreneur, or you try to uh, be within creative industries. And because I only talk to people, I mean, I'm still finishing my first novel, so um, I haven't gotten an agent yet. So um, I don't really want to say this is what you have to do because I don't really know. I'm figuring these things out as I go myself. Like, um, but I it's my hypothesis. So I'll just say it like this. This is my hypothesis. So why am I doing things the way that I'm doing them? Because I tend to think that the only thing that I really have is expertise and mastery, and the only thing that I can do is throw ideas against the wall. Um, and what you also have is human psychology. So there are things that people care about and actually pay attention to. And if you can if you have a certain amount of expertise and mastery, and you can pick a particular trajectory that lands within a space of things that people are actually paying attention to and care about, then you have the highest likelihood for having a uh, successful or profound idea. Now, here is why you have a higher likelihood for doing it this way, because you have the expertise and the mastery to be able to you have the capacity to do such a thing. Then you have the opportunity and the risk or the constraint. So people are very judgmental and choosy. So, um, when you decide, for instance, that you're going to, uh, it's because I think in the abstract. So, say for instance, you decide you're going to be a comedian, right? The only way you're going to be able to evaluate whether or not you're actually funny is if people laugh at what you say. Now, trying to be funny is it's certainly a matter of temperament, but it's not merely just temperament. You have to write material and you have to practice and you have to stand before people and deliver. And it's through that process that you say something funny. because the process is the bounding constraint. To me, the same thing's true for creative production or um, creative industry. What you have to be willing or able to do from a temperamental standpoint is to actually be creative. So, what does it mean to be creative? It means to do and to go where no one has gone before. You're doing and you're trying to go where no one has gone before. No one's done it like this. No one's approached it from this angle. No one has explored here. No one has gone here. No one has attempted this. You actually have to try for that. And when you try for that within a particular space and with a particular set of expertise or skills, lo and behold, you will begin to have ideas. And they will land, and some will land and some won't, but it's just the activity. And so I think oh yeah, yeah. So, because I was talking about ideation, but I had to go into all those things to talk about why I think about ideation in the way that I do. So, if you want to increase your ideation as a creative person, like you want to actually be a creative professional, then you should acquire a certain amount of expertise and having as many different uh, types of interrelated expertises is very useful. And then just go out and try to be creative at something where risk is involved. I don't think you necessarily have to try and make money, because if you show up for an open mic night at a comedy house, cats, cats, anyways, at a comedy house. So there's a cat anyway. At a comedy house, then you in all likelihood will have, depending on how much expertise you have, then how much you allow yourself to be the lightning rod. Because I think this is what people have to understand about being creative. You're trying to make yourself into a perfect lightning rod. You're not really trying to, I don't know. So I look at myself as stone or marble, something to be chiseled or something to make out of my capacities, temperament, and potential within a certain direction of being a mathematician, being a philosopher, being a writer, being a musician, being a painter, being a poet. I don't think I'm going to have time for sculpting, so I'm not going to put it on the list, but I'd like to be a sculptor if I could, that'd be fun. But either way, the act is in the shaping, and once you've beaten and hammered away at yourself enough, do you can you conduct lightning? So, for instance, there's a space. So for mathematics, stop that. Go outside. Damn cat. So anyways, for instance, in mathematics, if you really want to have a worthwhile mathematical idea, then you must do research. And that's why I choose to do mathematical research. If I want to write a very compelling piece of literature, then I have to get some publishing house to actually publish it, and people have to actually read it. And once they read it, they have to actually feel like this is indeed what they're reading. And because it takes a certain amount of skill and then a certain amount of risk taking and willingness to participate in a certain experience, lightning may strike. And failure is just involved. But that's what the process is. I mean, you're learning because skill and participation. It's all you have. The more skill you have and the more you participate at being creative, at whatever it is you want to be creative at, the more ideas you will have. So that's my advice, and happy hunting. Thank you for watching.